Marcus Chen maneuvered his ship through the asteroid field with practiced ease, dodging chunks of rock that could have pulverized a lesser pilot. His vessel, the Harmony, had been specifically designed for this mission. Every surface was covered in a specialized polymer coating that could resist biological contamination for limited periods. The life support system included 3 layers of filtration that could theoretically handle most known pathogens. Theoretically being the key word. Marcus had no idea if his preparations would work against alien parasites from beyond the galaxy's edge. "You should leave." Zara's voice crackled through his communication system, laden with centuries of pain. "I have killed thousands without meaning to. I will not add you to that number." Marcus brought his ship to a stop just outside what he estimated to be the infection zone. Through his reinforced viewport, he could see the dragon clearly for the first time. She was magnificent and horrifying in equal measure. Her natural beauty was undeniable even beneath the writhing mass of parasites. Each barnacle pulsed with its own rhythm, creating waves of movement across her hide like a living ocean. "I appreciate the warning," Marcus replied, checking his instruments. "But I didn't come this far to turn back now. Besides, I have some ideas about those hitchhikers of yours." "Ideas?" Zara's massive head turned toward his ship, her eyes glowing softly through the barnacle clusters. "Every scientist in the galaxy has studied my condition. There is no cure. These creatures are from a place where the normal rules of biology do not apply." Marcus smiled, though she couldn't see it. "That's where humans have an advantage. We're really good at breaking rules." He began deploying his equipment, mechanical arms extending from his ship, to set up a complex array of sensors and transmitters. Each device was designed to study different aspects of the barnacle infestation. Electromagnetic scanners, quantum field detectors, biological samplers that could work at a distance. "What are you doing?" Zara asked, watching the instruments unfold like metallic flowers around her prison of stone. "Getting to know your passengers," Marcus said, his fingers dancing across multiple control panels. "Every species has weaknesses, even ones from impossible places. I just need to find the right approach." The first scans revealed exactly what Marcus had expected and feared. The barnacles weren't just biological entities. They existed partially in normal space and partially in something else entirely, a dimension that human science barely understood, where energy behaved differently and matter followed alien geometries. "Fascinating," Marcus murmured, studying the readouts. "They're anchored in our reality through you, but most of their mass exists elsewhere. That's why they're so hard to remove. You can't fight something that's only half here." "You understand their nature already," Zara said, surprise coloring her mental voice. "It took the Galactic Science Council 5 years to reach that conclusion." "Humans have a different perspective on impossible things," Marcus replied, launching a probe toward her location. The small device stopped just short of the infection zone and began more detailed scans. "We've only been in space for a few hundred years, so we don't have the same assumptions about what's possible." The probe's data painted a clearer picture of Zara's condition. The barnacles were indeed parasitic, but not in the traditional sense. They were feeding on something deeper than her physical energy. They were consuming her quantum signature, the fundamental pattern that defined her existence. As they fed, they became more solidly anchored in normal space, which made them stronger and more capable of reproduction. "The good news," Marcus announced, "is that they need you alive to survive. They're not trying to kill you, just maintain a sustainable harvest." "That is hardly good news," Zara responded bitterly. "They may not wish to kill me, but they are doing so regardless." "I grow weaker each year." "Because they're inefficient," Marcus said, excitement creeping into his voice. "They're not designed for long-term sustainability. They're more like a virus that burns through hosts quickly in their home dimension. But here they're forced to adapt, and they're not very good at it." Marcus spent the next several hours running increasingly complex scans. He fired harmless energy pulses at the barnacles, tested their responses to different electromagnetic frequencies, and even tried playing various types of music to see if they reacted to sonic vibrations. The breakthrough came when he accidentally crossed 2 sensor beams. For a brief moment, the interference pattern created a small null field around one of the barnacles. The creature recoiled, pulling deeper into its shell, and its connection to the other dimension flickered. "Did you see that?" Marcus asked, replaying the sensor data. "I felt it," Zara said, wonder in her mental voice. For just an instant, the pain lessened. "What did you do?" "I think I found their off switch," Marcus said, his mind racing through possibilities. "They exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, but they're vulnerable at the connection points. If I can generate the right kind of interference pattern. He began reconfiguring his sensors, turning them from passive observers into active transmitters. The theory was simple. If the barnacles needed to maintain a connection between dimensions to survive, then disrupting that connection should weaken or even destroy them. The practice was infinitely more complex. Marcus had to calculate precise frequencies that would create the necessary interference without harming Zara herself. Too much power, and he might sever her own connection to reality. Too little, and the barnacles would simply adapt to the disruption. "This is madness," Zara said, watching him work. "You are risking your life for someone you have never met. Why?" Marcus paused in his calculations, considering the question. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because humans have a saying, never leave anyone behind. That includes alien dragons infested with interdimensional parasites." "But I am dangerous," Zara protested. "Even if you could remove these creatures, I would still be a plague carrier. The spores they have released over the years have contaminated my entire system." "One problem at a time," Marcus said, resuming his work. "First we get rid of your unwanted guests. Then we worry about the cleanup." As he worked, Marcus found himself studying Zara as much as her parasites. Despite her fearsome appearance and tragic circumstances, he could sense the intelligence and nobility that lay beneath. She had been bearing this burden alone for decades, protecting the galaxy by accepting exile and isolation. It was a sacrifice that would have broken most beings, but she endured. "There," Marcus said finally, completing his calculations. "I think I have the right frequency combination. But I need to get closer to implement it. The interference field has to be precisely targeted." "Absolutely not," Zara said firmly. "You will not risk exposure." "I forbid it," Marcus chuckled. "I appreciate the concern, but I didn't build all this fancy protective gear for nothing. Besides, someone once told me that humans are really good at breaking rules. Time to prove it." He guided the Harmony closer to Zara's position, entering the theoretical infection zone for the first time. His instruments immediately detected the presence of barnacle spores in the surrounding space. Millions of microscopic organisms that could doom any unprotected life form. But Marcus wasn't unprotected. And he wasn't planning to give up without a fight. "Hold still," he said, activating his modified sensors. "This might feel a little strange." The moment Marcus activated the interference field, Zara screamed. It wasn't a sound that came through the communication system, but a psychic cry of agony that seemed to tear through the fabric of space itself. Every barnacle on her hide suddenly blazed with angry light, pulsing in unison like a single massive heartbeat. The dragon's body convulsed, her massive tail lashing against the asteroid and sending chunks of rock spinning into the void. "Zara!" Marcus shouted, his hands flying over the controls to reduce the field intensity. "What's happening?" "Talk to me." The dragon's response came in broken fragments, her mental voice strained with pain. "They're fighting back, connected to my nervous system. Can't separate." Marcus cursed in 3 different languages as he analyzed the sensor data. The barnacles weren't just passive parasites. When threatened, they could send feedback through their connection to Zara's quantum signature, using her own nervous system against her. It was a defense mechanism he hadn't anticipated. "I'm shutting it down," he said, reaching for the master control. "No." Zara's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. "Don't stop. I can endure this. It's working." "I can feel some of them weakening." Marcus hesitated, watching the readings that showed both the barnacles' distress and Zara's agony. The interference field was indeed having an effect. Several of the smaller parasites had already lost their grip and fallen away from her hide, crumbling to dust as their dimensional anchors failed. But the larger ones were fighting back with increasing desperation. "This is too dangerous," Marcus said. "I need to find a better way." "There may not be time for better," Zara replied through gritted teeth. "I have been dying slowly for 20 years. A quick death in pursuit of freedom would be preferable." Marcus made a decision that went against every safety protocol he'd ever learned. He put on his environmental suit and prepared to leave the ship. "What are you doing now, human?" Zara asked, detecting the change in his ship's configuration. "Something incredibly stupid," Marcus admitted, checking his suit's seals one final time. "The field needs to be more precisely targeted. I can't do that from inside the ship." The barnacles covering Zara's hide began pulsing faster, as if sensing the approaching threat. Some of the larger specimens started extending tendrils toward Marcus's ship, trying to establish new infection vectors. The whole scene looked like something from humanity's worst nightmares about alien invasion. Marcus stepped out of his ship's airlock and activated his personal maneuvering unit. The silence of space was broken only by his own breathing and the quiet hum of his suit's systems. Around him, the spores released by the barnacles created a glittering cloud of potential death. "You are the most foolish creature I have ever encountered," Zara said, but there was something like admiration in her mental voice. No other species would risk so much for a stranger. "That's what makes us human," Marcus replied, approaching one of her wing joints where several large barnacles clustered together. "We're too stubborn to know when to quit." Up close, the parasites were even more horrifying than his sensors had suggested. Each barnacle was a writhing mass of flesh and chitin that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Looking at them directly made his eyes water and his head ache. They were simply wrong in a way that his human brain couldn't fully process. Marcus activated a portable version of his interference generator, a device no larger than a briefcase that had taken him 2 years to build. The targeted field struck the nearest barnacle cluster, and the results were immediate and dramatic. The parasites shrieked in frequencies that no earthly creature could produce. Their shells began to crack and dissolve as their connection to their home dimension was severed. But as they died, they released massive quantities of spores and toxic chemicals directly into the surrounding space. Marcus's suit alarms began screaming warnings about contamination levels that exceeded all known safety parameters. The protective coating on his equipment started to bubble and smoke as alien acids ate through the molecular bonds. He had perhaps minutes before his defenses failed completely. "Get back to your ship," Zara commanded, trying to twist her massive head around to see him. "You've done enough." "I won't have your death on my conscience." But Marcus pressed on, moving methodically from one barnacle cluster to the next. Each application of the interference field destroyed dozens of parasites, while filling the space around him with increasingly toxic waste. His suit's filtration system was working at maximum capacity, but it was a losing battle against contamination that had never been encountered before. "Why?" Zara asked, watching him work despite the obvious danger. "Why risk everything for me?" Marcus paused in his work, feeling the first tingling sensations that indicated his suit's protective barriers were beginning to fail. "Because everyone deserves a chance at freedom. Because you've been suffering alone for too long, and because sometimes someone has to be the first to try." The biggest barnacle cluster was located just behind Zara's head, where her neck joined her massive shoulders. The parasites there were older and more deeply rooted than the others. They had grown into her scales, creating a grotesque fusion of dragon and alien flesh that pulsed with its own malevolent life. As Marcus approached this final target, the barnacles seemed to sense their doom. They began releasing every spore they could produce, creating a toxic cloud so dense that it blocked his view of everything beyond a few meters. His suit's outer shell was dissolving visibly now, eaten away by acids that could break down matter at the molecular level. "Marcus," Zara said quietly, using his name for the first time, "you need to leave. Now. This is beyond what any creature should attempt." "Almost done," Marcus gasped, feeling the first traces of alien toxins beginning to seep through his suit's failing barriers. His hands were shaking now, making it difficult to aim the interference generator properly. Just one more cluster. He triggered the device at maximum power, pouring everything his generators could produce into a focused beam of dimensional disruption. The ancient barnacles that had been feeding on Zara for decades suddenly found their connection to their home dimension not just interrupted, but completely severed. The psychic scream that followed could be heard across half the solar system. The dying parasites released every poison they possessed in a final act of spite, creating a toxic cloud that would have been lethal to any unprotected life form within 1,000 kilometers. Marcus felt his suit systems failing one by one as the alien acids finally overwhelmed his defenses. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Zara's massive eye, glowing with an inner light that he hadn't seen before. For the first time in decades, patches of pure white scales were visible on her hide where the barnacles had fallen away. "Human," she whispered as darkness claimed him. "You beautiful, impossible fool." Zara had never moved so fast in her life. The moment Marcus's suit failed and he began drifting unconscious in the toxic cloud, she uncoiled from the asteroid and surged forward. Her massive claws, surprisingly gentle despite their size, scooped the human from the deadly miasma of alien spores and acids. She could feel the remaining barnacles on her hide screaming in protest, trying to release more toxins to kill this threat to their existence. She ignored them. For the first time in 20 years, Zara had something more important than her own suffering to worry about. Moving with desperate precision, she carried Marcus toward his ship while using her own body to shield him from the worst of the contamination. The toxic cloud clung to her scales, but what was one more poison to a creature who had been slowly dying for decades? Her white hide, now partially visible where barnacles had fallen away, began to smoke and discolor from the alien acids. The ship's airlock was designed for human-sized occupants, but Zara managed to manipulate the controls with surprising delicacy. Her claws, each one longer than Marcus was tall, activated the emergency medical protocols that would flood the chamber with decontamination fields and healing nanobots. "Please work," she whispered to technologies she barely understood. "Please let this not be in vain." As the decontamination cycle ran, Zara examined her own condition with growing amazement. Nearly 30% of the barnacles that had covered her hide were gone, their connection to their home dimension permanently severed by Marcus's interference field. For the first time in decades, she could feel solar radiation directly on her scales. The sensation was so overwhelming that she wept tears of pure starlight. But the remaining parasites were adapting. The larger, older specimens had survived the initial treatment by temporarily severing their own connection to her nervous system. Now they were rebuilding those connections, but with new defenses. She could feel them creating buffer zones around their dimensional anchors, making them harder to target with the same technique. The ship's medical bay chimed softly, indicating that Marcus was stable but still unconscious. Zara peered through the viewport with one massive eye, studying the human who had risked everything for her freedom. His breathing was steady, and the decontamination process had neutralized most of the alien toxins in his system, but the long-term effects were still unknown. "Wake up, impossible human," she said softly. "I need your wisdom." While Marcus recovered, Zara began experimenting with the equipment he had left behind. Her intelligence was ancient and vast, accumulated over centuries of existence, but human technology operated on principles that were foreign to her. Everything was miniaturized, efficient, designed for creatures who lived fast and thought faster. She managed to activate his main computer system, using careful manipulations of her claw tips on the touch-sensitive interfaces. The device immediately began displaying information about the barnacle species, cross-referenced with data from humanity's brief but intensive study of interdimensional phenomena. What she found both amazed and terrified her. Humans had only encountered interdimensional beings 3 times in their short spacefaring history. Each time they had responded not with fear or worship, but with scientific curiosity and engineering solutions. They had developed theoretical frameworks for understanding creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time. More importantly, they had created practical tools for dealing with such entities. Marcus's interference generator was not a hastily assembled prototype, but the culmination of decades of human research into dimensional engineering. His seemingly reckless assault on her parasites had actually been carefully calculated, based on extensive modeling of interdimensional biology. The barnacles covering her hide were not unique. They were part of a species that had plagued several galaxies, jumping from host to host across dimensional barriers whenever they exhausted their current feeding grounds. Most civilizations that encountered them either fled or were consumed. Humans characteristically had decided to fight back. "Fascinating," Zara murmured, scrolling through databases filled with human research. "They have turned war into science." Marcus stirred in the medical bay, consciousness returning slowly as the healing nanobots completed their work. Zara immediately focused her attention on the small chamber where her unlikely savior was recovering. "How do you feel?" she asked as his eyes fluttered open. Marcus groaned and sat up slowly, checking his hands and arms for signs of contamination damage. "Like I've been dissolved and reassembled, but alive, which is better than I expected." He paused, looking through the viewport at her partially cleaned hide. "Did it work?" "Better than you know," Zara replied, angling herself so he could see the patches of clean white scales that now decorated her form. "But the remaining parasites are adapting. Your initial approach may not work a second time." Marcus nodded, pulling up his own research data on a portable display. I expected that. These creatures are survivors, but humans are pretty good at adapting too. He began outlining his next approach, and Zara found herself marveling at the human capacity for creative problem-solving. Where other species might have tried to perfect the same technique, Marcus was already developing entirely new methods of attack. Sonic disruptors that could shatter the barnacles' shells, quantum entanglement fields that could trap them between dimensions, even biological warfare using engineered viruses that could infect interdimensional parasites. You plan to make war on them, Zara observed. They started it, Marcus replied with a grin that was equal parts humor and determination. Besides, I've never liked bullies, especially ones that pick on magnificent dragons. Despite everything, Zara found herself laughing for the first time in decades. The sound echoed through the asteroid field like distant thunder, causing several small rocks to crack from the vibrations. You are unlike any creature I have ever encountered, she said. Most species would have given up after the first failure. You speak of this as merely the opening move in a longer campaign. That's humanity for you, Marcus said, already working on modifications to his equipment. We don't know when to quit. It's probably our worst and best trait all at once. As he worked, Zara found herself studying this strange being who had appeared in her darkest hour. Humans were physically unremarkable compared to most spacefaring species. They were smaller than dragons, less technologically advanced than the crystalline collective, and far younger than the ancient civilizations that dominated galactic politics. But they possessed something that seemed to be unique in the galaxy, an absolute refusal to accept that any problem was unsolvable. Other species might have studied her condition and concluded that nothing could be done. Humans looked at an impossible situation and asked, "How do we fix this?" "There is something I must tell you," Zara said as Marcus prepared his new approach. "Even if you remove all the barnacles, I will still be contaminated. 20 years of carrying them has left traces of their biology throughout my system. I may never be truly safe to be around other living beings." Marcus paused in his work and looked directly at her through the viewport. "Then we'll figure out how to fix that too. One problem at a time, remember?" The absolute certainty in his voice sent a shiver through Zara's massive form. This human truly believed that every problem had a solution, that every challenge could be overcome with enough creativity and determination. It was a worldview so alien to her experience that it felt like encountering magic. "Are all humans like you?" she asked. Marcus grinned and returned to his preparations. "Wait until you meet the rest of us. I'm actually considered pretty conservative back home." The second assault began at dawn, though dawn meant little in the depths of space. Marcus had chosen the timing based on the barnacles' circadian rhythms, a discovery that had surprised them both. Even creatures from beyond dimensional barriers apparently followed some form of biological clock. Over the past week, Marcus had transformed his ship into a mobile weapons laboratory. New devices sprouted from every available surface, each one designed to exploit a different weakness in the parasite's interdimensional biology. Sonic cannons capable of generating frequencies that could shatter the barnacles' shells. Quantum field generators that could isolate individual parasites from their collective consciousness. Even a prototype temporal disruptor that could theoretically age the creatures to death in seconds. Zara watched these preparations with growing fascination and dread. The human's determination was infectious, but she had lived with her tormentors long enough to know their capabilities. They were learning, adapting, preparing their own defenses. "They know you're coming," she warned as Marcus made final adjustments to his equipment. "I can feel them plotting, coordinating in ways they never have before." "Good," Marcus replied, surprising her. "That means they're scared. Fear makes creatures predictable." The first target was a cluster of ancient barnacles that had grown together into a massive colony near the base of her tail. These parasites had been with her the longest, and they had developed the most sophisticated defenses. Their shells had thickened to resist physical attacks, and they had learned to share the load of dimensional anchoring, making them harder to isolate. Marcus opened fire with his sonic cannon, sending waves of precisely tuned vibrations through Zara's scales. The barnacles immediately responded by shifting their resonance frequency, trying to nullify the attack. But Marcus had anticipated this, and his weapon automatically adjusted its output to match their countermeasures. The battle that followed was unlike anything Zara had ever experienced. It wasn't the brutal, straightforward violence that characterized most conflicts in the galaxy. This was a contest of pure intellect, with each side constantly adapting their tactics in response to the other's moves. The barnacles tried to overwhelm Marcus's defenses by releasing massive clouds of spores, hoping to contaminate his equipment and force him to retreat. Marcus responded by deploying automated drones that could operate in the toxic environment, extending his reach while keeping himself safe. When the parasites began using Zara's own nervous system to send feedback attacks, Marcus activated his quantum field generators to isolate them from their host. The barnacles countered by linking themselves together into a collective consciousness, sharing the burden of maintaining their dimensional anchors. Remarkable, Zara breathed, watching the deadly dance of move and countermove. They are evolving in real time. So are my weapons, Marcus replied through gritted teeth, his hands flying across multiple control panels as he managed dozens of different systems simultaneously. The question is who can adapt faster? The answer came when Marcus deployed his secret weapon, a virus he had engineered specifically to target the barnacles' dimensional biology. It was invisible, undetectable by their normal senses, and it spread through their quantum connections like wildfire. The first barnacle to succumb simply ceased. One moment it was pulsing with alien life. The next it was empty shell crumbling to dust. The virus had severed its connection to the interdimensional realm so completely that it forgot how to exist. Within minutes, the infection had spread to a dozen more parasites. Then 100. The ancient colony that had seemed so invincible began dissolving as its individual components lost their grip on reality. But the barnacles' final gambit nearly killed them both. Sensing their own destruction, the remaining parasites in the colony did something unprecedented. They opened a direct portal to their home dimension, sacrificing themselves to summon something that had never before crossed into normal space. The entity that emerged defied description. It was shadow and hunger given form, a fragment of the void between galaxies that existed only to consume. Unlike the barnacles, which needed hosts to survive in normal space, this creature could maintain itself temporarily through pure malevolence. Marcus. Zara screamed as the thing lunged toward his ship with tendrils of living darkness. Get away from here! But Marcus didn't flee. Instead, he did something that was purely impossibly human. He laughed. You know what? He said, activating every weapon system simultaneously. I was getting bored with fighting parasites. Let's see what you've got, shadow monster. The battle that followed was brief but apocalyptic. The void entity attacked with forces that could unravel matter at the quantum level, trying to drag both Marcus and Zara into the space between dimensions. Marcus responded with every piece of advanced technology humanity had ever devised, turning his modest ship into a one-man army against impossible darkness. The temporal disruptor aged portions of the creature to death in seconds. The quantum field generators trapped other sections in recursive loops of cause and effect. The sonic cannons shattered its coherence, while the biological weapons ate away at its dimensional anchors. Most importantly, Marcus refused to be afraid. Where other species might have been paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of their opponent, the human attacked it like any other engineering problem to be solved. The entity lasted exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds before dissolving back into the void from which it came. The portal collapsed, taking with it the last remnants of the barnacle colony that had summoned it. In the sudden silence that followed, Zara and Marcus stared at each other through the ship's viewport. The dragon's tail, which had been covered in a writhing mass of parasites just minutes before, was now completely clean. Pure white scales gleamed in the starlight, unmarked by any trace of alien contamination. Did we just... Zara began, hardly daring to believe it. Win a fight against something from outside reality itself? Marcus finished, checking his instruments to confirm what his eyes were telling him. Yeah, I think we did, but their celebration was premature. The void entity's appearance had sent shockwaves through the remaining barnacle colonies on Zara's body. They were no longer fighting just to survive, but to prevent their own kind from suffering the same fate as the destroyed colony. Every remaining parasite began changing, adapting, evolving at a rate that should have been impossible. They were incorporating lessons learned from watching their fellows die, developing new defenses, new strategies, new ways of anchoring themselves to their host. They're learning from our victories, Zara observed with a mixture of admiration and horror. Each success teaches them how to resist the next attack. Marcus nodded, already planning his next move. Then we'll just have to learn faster than they do. Fortunately, humans are really good at learning from our mistakes. He began reconfiguring his weapons for the next assault, and Zara found herself marveling once again at this creature's absolute refusal to accept defeat. Most beings would have been satisfied with the partial victory they had already achieved. Marcus treated it as merely the opening move in a longer campaign. You realize, she said quietly, that this could take years, decades even. The remaining parasites may prove impossible to remove. Marcus looked up from his work with that characteristic human grin that had become so familiar to her. Then I guess we'd better get comfortable. I've got nowhere else to be. 3 months had passed since Marcus first arrived at the asteroid belt, and the war against the barnacles had become something approaching an art form. Where once there had been millions of parasites covering every inch of Zara's hide, now only a few hundred remained. But these survivors were the strongest, the most adaptable, the most deeply entrenched in her biological systems. They had also become something else, intelligent. The remaining barnacles had formed a collective consciousness, pooling their individual awareness into something that approached true sentience. They could think, plan, and adapt with frightening speed. More concerning, they had begun to communicate. Human Marcus came a voice that wasn't Zara's, transmitted through the dragon's communication implant, but speaking in harmonics no dragon throat could produce. We would speak with you. Marcus paused in his latest equipment modifications, a fusion of quantum mechanics and biological warfare that would have been considered impossible by any other species. Well, this is new. The parasites want to negotiate. We are no longer mere parasites, the collective voice replied, causing the remaining barnacles on Zara's hide to pulse in unison. We have become something greater through necessity. You have forced us to evolve beyond our original nature. Zara shuddered at the sensation of alien thoughts moving through her nervous system. They're using me as a speaker. I can feel their consciousness pressing against mine. What do you want? Marcus asked, continuing his work while talking. He had learned that showing weakness or too much interest would only encourage the creatures to make more demands. Survival, the collective replied. We propose a compromise. Allow us to maintain a small colony on this host, and we will eliminate the toxins we have introduced to her system over the decades. She will be free to interact with other beings without risk of infection. Tempting, Marcus said, not meaning it at all. But I have a better idea. How about you all leave voluntarily and I don't have to use my newest toy? He gestured to his latest creation, a device that combined elements of every successful weapon he had deployed so far. Temporal disruptors, quantum field generators, biological warfare, sonic resonance, and several entirely new approaches that human science had developed specifically for this campaign. You cannot destroy us all, the collective said, with what sounded like confidence. We have studied your methods. We have adapted beyond your ability to counter. Have you? Marcus asked with genuine curiosity. Because I've been studying you too, and I think I've figured out your biggest weakness. The barnacles began pulsing faster, a sign of agitation that Zara had learned to recognize. Explain. You're too smart now, Marcus said, activating his new device. When you were simple parasites, you acted on instinct. That made you unpredictable, harder to counter. But now you think, you plan, you try to be logical. That makes you predictable. The weapon he had built was unlike anything he had used before. Instead of attacking the barnacles directly, it targeted their collective consciousness itself. It was a weapon designed to fight intelligence, to disrupt the quantum fields that allowed their shared awareness to function. You cannot destroy thought itself, the collective protested, but there was uncertainty in their harmonized voice. Watch me, Marcus replied, and activated the consciousness disruptor. The effect was immediate and devastating. The barnacles' collective intelligence shattered like glass, breaking apart into hundreds of individual minds that had forgotten how to cooperate. Without their shared awareness, they lost the ability to adapt and evolve in real time. They became what they had originally been, simple parasites acting on instinct. And simple parasites were exactly what Marcus had learned to fight months ago. Working with methodical precision, he deployed every weapon in his arsenal against the now disorganized colonies. Sonic cannons shattered their shells. Quantum fields isolated them from their dimensional anchors. Biological weapons ate away at their connection to their home realm. Temporal disruptors aged them to death in seconds. But it was the final few dozen barnacles that proved the most challenging. These were the oldest, the most deeply rooted in Zara's biology. They had grown into her scales, fused with her nervous system, become part of her very essence. Removing them without killing her would require surgical precision beyond anything Marcus had attempted before. "I need to operate," he told Zara as he prepared his most delicate instruments. "This is going to require me to work directly on your scales, possibly beneath them." "The risk, I understand," Zara replied, her mental voice calm despite the magnitude of what he was proposing. "I trust you." Those 3 words hit Marcus harder than any attack the void creature had launched. Trust. After months of fighting together, of sharing dangers and discoveries, the galaxy's most feared plague carrier trusted him with her life. Marcus donned his most advanced environmental suit and left his ship for what he hoped would be the final time. The space around Zara was no longer the toxic wasteland it had been when he first arrived. His weapons had neutralized most of the contamination, leaving only trace amounts of alien chemistry that his suit could easily handle. Working with tools that were part surgical instruments, part quantum computers, and part weapons, Marcus began the delicate process of extracting the final parasites. Each one had to be precisely targeted, its dimensional anchors severed without damaging the nervous tissue it had grown into. It was the most challenging work of his life. Each barnacle was unique, requiring a different approach, a different combination of techniques. Some yielded to sonic disruption. Others required temporal manipulation to weaken their grip on reality. The oldest specimens needed to be carefully disassembled at the molecular level, their alien biology unraveled one protein at a time. Hours passed, then more hours. Marcus lost track of time, focused entirely on the microscopic battlefield where human ingenuity fought against interdimensional parasites for control of a dragon's soul. "You're killing yourself," Zara observed as Marcus's movements became increasingly unsteady. His suit's life support was running low, and the precision work was exhausting him beyond all reasonable limits. "Almost done," Marcus gasped, targeting the final cluster of barnacles that had grown around Zara's heart. These were the deepest, the most dangerous to remove. They had integrated themselves so completely with her cardiac system that destroying them incorrectly could stop her heart forever. But Marcus had not come this far to accept failure now. With hands that shook from exhaustion but never wavered in their purpose, he applied every technique he had learned over months of warfare. Sonic pulses to weaken their shells, quantum fields to isolate their consciousness, biological agents to dissolve their dimensional anchors, temporal distortions to age them past their ability to maintain coherence. One by one, the final parasites lost their grip on reality and crumbled to dust. The last barnacle fell away from Zara's heart at exactly 13:47 hours, ship time, after 20 years of constant infestation. After months of the most intensive interdimensional warfare in galactic history, the galaxy's most feared plague carrier was finally, completely free. For a long moment neither of them spoke. They simply existed in the silence of space, 2 beings who had fought the impossible and won. "It's over," Zara whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "They're gone. All of them." Marcus smiled inside his helmet, too exhausted to speak, but filled with a satisfaction deeper than any he had ever known. Humanity had won another impossible victory against the darkness between stars. Now came the hardest part, learning to live with freedom. 6 months after the last barnacle fell from her scales, Zara still sometimes forgot that she was free. She would wake from dreams of contamination and infection, phantom sensations making her believe the parasites had returned. Her claws would sweep across her hide, searching for growths that were no longer there, finding only the smooth perfection of clean white scales that gleamed like polished pearl in the light of distant stars. Marcus understood. He had seen enough trauma cases during humanity's brief but violent expansion into space to recognize the symptoms. Freedom, it turned out, was something that had to be learned as much as earned. "It's normal," he told her during one of their regular conversations, his ship now permanently docked to a habitat platform he had constructed in the asteroid belt. "Your mind needs time to accept what your body already knows. Give it time." The platform itself was a marvel of human engineering, a combination living space and research station that could sustain both of them indefinitely. Marcus had built it partially because he wasn't ready to leave, and partially because Zara wasn't ready to be left alone. 20 years of isolation weren't easily overcome. Even when the reason for that isolation had been eliminated, they had become something unique in the galaxy, an interspecies partnership built on mutual respect and shared survival. Marcus continued his research into interdimensional biology, while Zara served as both test subject and colleague, her ancient wisdom complementing his innovative approach to impossible problems. The galaxy, meanwhile, was slowly learning about their success. The first to arrive had been a crystalline collective science vessel, its crew drawn by the energy signatures from their battles against the void entity. They had expected to find a dead system contaminated by plague, instead discovering a clean dragon and a human discussing quantum field theory over breakfast. The crew's terror when they first detected Zara had been almost comical. Emergency protocols activated, quarantine fields deployed, distress signals transmitted to half the galaxy. It had taken 3 days of careful negotiation before they would accept that the infamous plague dragon was no longer dangerous. "She's really cured?" the crystalline captain had asked Marcus, his geometric form flickering with disbelief. "The most dangerous biological threat in known space eliminated by one human with improvised equipment? We prefer to think of it as interdisciplinary cooperation," Marcus had replied with characteristic modesty. "Besides, Zara did most of the hard work. I just provided technical support." Word of their success had spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Scientists from dozens of species had requested permission to study Marcus's techniques, while politicians debated the implications of humanity's latest impossible achievement. Some were calling it the greatest medical breakthrough in galactic history. Others were quietly terrified that humans could solve problems no one else had even dared to attempt. For Zara, the attention was both liberating and overwhelming. Species that had once fled at the mention of her name were now requesting audiences, seeking her wisdom on matters ranging from interdimensional physics to the psychology of long-term isolation. She was becoming something she had never expected, a celebrity. "I don't understand why they want to hear from me," she confided to Marcus during one of their evening discussions. "I spent 20 years as a plague carrier. What wisdom could I possibly offer?" "You survived," Marcus replied simply. "You endured 2 decades of isolation and suffering without losing your essential self. You protected the galaxy by accepting exile, even when it meant living in constant pain. That's not just wisdom, Zara. That's heroism." Their greatest success had come when they applied Marcus's treatment methods to 3 other dragons who had been infected by barnacle variants in distant sectors. The procedures had been complex, requiring months of careful work, but all 3 had been successfully cured. The interdimensional parasite plague that had threatened the galaxy for centuries was finally on the retreat. "We should start a clinic," Marcus suggested during one of their research sessions. "There are probably hundreds of beings throughout the galaxy suffering from similar conditions. With our combined expertise—" "You mean with your expertise and my patient testimonials," Zara corrected, but there was humor in her mental voice. Their partnership had evolved into something resembling friendship, built on mutual respect and the shared experience of fighting impossible odds. Marcus had officially been declared missing by the human colonial authorities, presumed lost during a routine exploration mission. He could have corrected the record at any time, but chose not to. His old life seemed small compared to the work he was doing here, treating conditions that other species considered incurable. "Don't you miss it?" Zara asked him one day as they watched a supply ship from the collective unload equipment for their expanding research station. "Your old life?"
Your own kind?
Marcus considered the question carefully. "I miss some things. Good coffee, rain, the sound of human laughter. But I wouldn't trade this for anything. We're doing work that no one else in the galaxy can do. We're solving problems that have plagued civilizations for millennia. How could I give that up to go back to routine survey missions?" Their latest project was the most ambitious yet, developing a universal treatment protocol that could eliminate interdimensional parasites without requiring months of custom research for each case. It was theoretical work at the cutting edge of multiple scientific disciplines, combining human innovation with dragon wisdom and alien technology from dozens of species. "If we succeed," Zara mused, studying the equations that covered the walls of their laboratory, "we could eliminate this type of plague throughout the galaxy. No one would ever have to suffer as I did." "When we succeed," Marcus corrected firmly. I've learned not to bet against impossible things where humans are involved. As if summoned by his words, an alert chimed from their communication array. Another infected being had been detected in the Vega sector, this time a cetacean intelligence whose song-based biology had been compromised by acoustic parasites. From the void between dimensions, Marcus and Zara exchanged a look that had become familiar over the months of their partnership. Another impossible case, another chance to prove that no problem was truly unsolvable. Well, Marcus said, beginning preparations for their next impossible mission. Looks like we're needed again. Zara stretched her magnificent wings, feeling the solar wind flow across scales that were finally permanently clean. For the first time in decades, she had purpose beyond mere survival. She had work to do, beings to help, impossible things to accomplish. Then we had better not keep them waiting, she replied. And together they launched into the space between stars, carrying hope to those who had forgotten what freedom felt like. Behind them, their research station continued its automated work, broadcasting the techniques they had developed to anyone in the galaxy who might need them. It was a gift freely given, in the finest tradition of both species. Dragon wisdom and human determination, working together to make the universe a little less impossible for everyone. The galaxy's most contagious albino dragon had indeed changed everything. But she hadn't done it alone. Sometimes, it took the impossible stubbornness of humanity to show even ancient dragons what they were truly capable of achieving. And somewhere in the void between dimensions, things that had never known fear began to learn what it meant to face the combined will of beings who refused to accept that any problem was unsolvable.